During the celebration dinner for my daughter-in-law's promotion, my grandson pulled me into the kitchen. "Grandma, Mom didn't deserve that job. Last month, I saw her boss leaving our house while Dad was traveling. He said promotions come with a price. Do you want to know what else I heard him say?" Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. My name is Bernice Winters, and at 63 years old, I thought I'd seen enough of life's complications to recognize trouble when it arrived at my door. I was wrong. Trouble came disguised as celebration, wrapped in champagne toasts and congratulatory hugs, and it arrived on a Tuesday evening in late September at my son's sprawling colonial house in Fairfield County, Connecticut. The dinner was meant to honor my daughter-in-law, Tina. After 7 years of grueling hours at Hartwell & Associates, one of the region's most prestigious marketing firms, she'd finally been promoted to senior vice president. My son Thomas had spared no expense, catered food from that French restaurant downtown, flowers arranged on every surface, even a small string quartet playing softly in the corner of their dining room. I'd driven the 40 minutes from my cottage in Millbridge, the same cottage where I'd raised Thomas after his father passed. The place felt emptier these days, but I'd grown to appreciate the solitude. It gave me time to tend my garden, read my mystery novels, and occasionally video chat with my grandson, 12-year-old Oliver. Oliver. Sweet, observant Oliver with his father's dark hair and his mother's sharp green eyes. He'd always been perceptive, the kind of child who noticed when you were sad, even when you smiled, who remembered every promise and caught every inconsistency in a story. The dinner had been pleasant enough. Tina looked radiant in a navy dress, her blonde hair swept up elegantly. She'd always been composed, almost unnaturally so, the kind of woman who could negotiate $1 million contract and never break a sweat. Thomas beamed with pride, his arm around her shoulders as he toasted her success. Their other son, 6-year-old Jesse, had fallen asleep on the couch halfway through dessert. It was while I was helping clear the plates that Oliver appeared beside me, his small hand tugging at my sleeve with an urgency that made my heart skip. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Can we talk? In the kitchen?" The kitchen was separated from the dining room by a swinging door, offering just enough privacy. I followed him, watching as he glanced back nervously to ensure no one had noticed our departure. The quartet's music provided cover for our conversation. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked, crouching down to his level despite the protest in my knees. His face was pale, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. "Grandma, Mom didn't deserve that job." The words hit me like cold water. I froze, searching his face for any sign of childish mischief or misunderstanding. I found only fear. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Oliver's eyes filled with tears. "Last month I saw her boss leaving our house while Dad was traveling for that conference in Boston. I came home early from soccer practice because Coach was sick. Mom didn't know I was there. I heard them talking in Dad's study." My pulse quickened. "Oliver, honey, sometimes bosses visit—" "He wasn't just visiting, Grandma." Oliver's voice cracked. He said promotions come with a price. And he said other things. Bad things. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too warm. I placed my hands on Oliver's shoulders, steadying both him and myself. "What else did you hear?" He looked down at his shoes, the words spilling out in a rush. "He told Mom that if she wanted the VP position, she needed to keep him happy. That's what he said. Keep him happy. And he said Dad would never find out if she was smart about it. Then he touched her arm, and Mom pulled away. But she looked scared, Grandma. Really scared. She told him she'd earned the position on merit, and he laughed. He said merit doesn't matter when you're a woman in a man's company." I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. "Did your mother see you?" "No. I stayed hidden in the hallway. I heard him leave, and then Mom went to her bedroom. I heard her crying. The revelation hung between us, toxic and heavy. I thought about Tina at the dinner table, her smile perhaps a shade too bright, her laughter a beat too quick. I'd attributed it to excitement, but now I wondered if I'd missed something darker beneath the surface. "Oliver, have you told your father?" He shook his head violently. "I tried once, but every time I start I get scared. What if Dad thinks Mom did something wrong? What if he gets mad at her? What if— He trailed off, but I understood. What if the family fell apart? Grandma, there's more, Oliver continued, his voice barely audible now. I've been watching. The boss, his name is Mr. Carlisle. He texts Mom all the time, even late at night. I've seen her phone light up, and she always looks worried when it's him. Last week, she had to go to a business dinner on Friday night, but when she came home, she looked like she'd been crying. She went straight to the bathroom and stayed there for an hour. My mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Was Tina being blackmailed? Harassed? Had she compromised herself, or was she being coerced? And why hadn't she confided in Thomas? Or in me? Oliver, listen to me carefully, I said, keeping my voice steady. You did the right thing telling me. But we need to be very careful about this. We need to understand what's really happening before we say anything to your father. Can you do that? Can you keep this between us for now? He nodded, relief flooding his features. I knew you'd help, Grandma. I knew you'd know what to do, but I didn't know what to do. Not yet. All I knew was that something rotten had infected my family, and I was perhaps the only one who could see it clearly. We returned to the dining room, where Thomas was regaling everyone with the story of Tina's first big presentation at Hartwell. She smiled at all the right moments, but when her eyes met mine across the table, I saw something flicker there. A question, perhaps, or a warning. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I made appropriate responses, smiled when expected, and hugged everyone goodbye. But my mind was elsewhere, cataloging every interaction, every glance, every word for hidden meaning. As I drove home through the darkening Connecticut countryside, the trees forming shadows along the winding roads, I couldn't shake the image of Tina's face when Oliver described her fear. I thought about the cottage waiting for me, suddenly feeling less like a sanctuary and more like a command center, because I'd made a decision in that kitchen, standing beside my frightened grandson. I would uncover the truth about Robert Carlisle and Tina's promotion. I would do it quietly, carefully, and thoroughly, and I would protect both Tina and my family from whatever darkness was threatening to consume them. I just didn't realize how deep that darkness ran, or how many secrets were waiting to be unearthed. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed my phone had 3 missed calls, all from Thomas. When I called back, his voice was tight with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Mom, did Oliver say anything strange to you tonight? My heart hammered against my ribs. Strange? What do you mean? He's been acting odd lately. Tina thinks he might be having trouble at school. I just wanted to check if he mentioned anything to you. The lie formed before I could stop it. No, darling. We just chatted about his soccer team. Why? There was a pause, filled with unspoken tension. No reason. Just keep an eye on him, will you? If he does say anything unusual. After we hung up, I sat in my car in the darkness, watching the lights in my cottage windows. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted, and the sound felt like a warning. I'd just lied to my son to protect a secret I didn't fully understand. And tomorrow, I would begin an investigation that could either save my family or destroy it completely. The question was, which truth was I really looking for? The one that would vindicate Tina, or the one that would confirm my worst fears? Either way, I was about to discover that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The investigation begins, but Bernice doesn't yet realize she's not just uncovering Tina's secrets. She's about to stumble into a web of corporate corruption, manipulation, and danger that goes far deeper than a simple workplace harassment case. What will she discover when she starts digging into Robert Carlisle's background? And why is Tina so afraid to speak the truth? The morning after the dinner, I woke with a plan forming in my mind, like frost on a window, delicate, intricate, and clear. I'd spent half the night lying awake, my mystery novels stacked on the nightstand suddenly seeming like research material rather than entertainment. If Agatha Christie had taught me anything, it was that investigation required methodical thinking and attention to detail. I started with what I knew. Robert Carlisle, senior partner at Hartwell and Associates, had visited Tina while Thomas was away. He'd made inappropriate comments, He'd implied the promotion came with conditions. And Tina was terrified. What I didn't know could fill an ocean. I made coffee and opened my laptop, grateful that Thomas had insisted on teaching me basic internet skills last year. The kitchen table became my workspace, and I began searching for information about Robert Carlyle. His professional profile appeared first. Georgetown Law, 20 years in corporate marketing law, multiple industry awards. His photo showed a man in his early 50s with silver hair and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The kind of man who looked trustworthy in a boardroom and predatory everywhere else. I dug deeper, searching for news articles, social media, anything that might reveal character beyond the polished professional facade. That's when I found the first thread, a brief mention in a trade publication from 3 years ago about a workplace culture investigation at Hartwell & Associates that had been resolved internally. No details, no names, just that single sanitized phrase. My phone rang, interrupting my research. Tina's name flashed on the screen. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering, my voice carefully neutral. "Good morning, dear." "Bernice, hi." Tina's voice sounded strained, different from the confident tone she'd used at dinner. "I wanted to thank you again for coming last night. It meant a lot to have you there." "Of course, I wouldn't have missed it." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "You seemed a bit tired, though. Are you feeling all right?" There was a long silence. Too long. Just exhausted from work. The new position comes with a lot of pressure. I imagine it does. I waited, giving her space to say more, but she didn't take it. "Tina, if you ever need to talk about anything at all, you know I'm here, don't you?" Another pause. "I know. Thank you, Bernice." After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone, certain that she'd wanted to say something more. The fear in Oliver's description of her hadn't been my imagination. Tina was carrying a burden she couldn't share, and I needed to understand why. By noon, I'd discovered that Robert Carlyle had been married twice, divorced both times, with sealed court records. That detail alone set off alarm bells. People didn't seal divorce proceedings unless there was something worth hiding: affairs, abuse, financial irregularities. I was so absorbed in my research that I didn't hear Thomas's car in the driveway. His knock on the door made me jump, and I quickly closed the laptop before answering. "Mom!" He swept me into a hug, but I could feel the tension in his shoulders. "I was nearby showing a property and thought I'd stop by. Are you busy?" "Never too busy for you, darling." I ushered him inside, hyper-aware of the laptop on my kitchen table. "Coffee? Please?" He settled into his usual chair, the one he'd sat in since childhood, and I noticed the shadows under his eyes. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." My stomach clenched. "Of course." "Did Oliver seem upset last night? Did he say anything about Tina?" I busied myself with the coffee maker, buying time. "He seemed fine to me." "Why? What's going on?" Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he'd inherited from his father. "He's been withdrawn lately. Won't talk to us much. Spends a lot of time in his room. Tina thinks it's normal preteen stuff, but I'm worried. And last night, after you left, I found him crying in his bedroom. He wouldn't tell me why." The weight of Oliver's secret pressed against my chest. I wanted to tell Thomas everything, to unburden both Oliver and myself, but something held me back. If I was wrong about what was happening, if there was an innocent explanation I hadn't considered, I could destroy Tina's career and reputation based on a child's misunderstanding. And if I was right, Thomas needed more than suspicion before I shattered his world. "Maybe he's having trouble with friends at school," I offered, hating the deception but knowing it was necessary. You know how cruel children can be at that age. Thomas accepted the coffee gratefully. "Maybe. Tina suggested we take him to a therapist, but I don't know. Feels like overreacting. It might help him to talk to someone neutral," I said carefully. "Sometimes children find it easier to confide in strangers than family." We talked for another 20 minutes about ordinary things: his real estate business, my garden, plans for Thanksgiving. But beneath the normalcy, I felt the weight of unspoken truths accumulating like snow before an avalanche. After Thomas left, I returned to my research with renewed urgency. I needed concrete evidence before I could act, and I was running out of time. Oliver was suffering, Tina was frightened, and my son was blind to the danger in his own home. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I created a fake social media profile. Hannah Mitchell, recently relocated to Connecticut, interested in corporate law and marketing. I used a stock photo of a woman roughly Tina's age and began connecting with people who worked at Hartwell and Associates. By evening, I'd sent connection requests to 15 current and former employees. 3 accepted within the hour. I crafted my message carefully. Hi, I'm considering a position at Hartwell and Associates and wanted to get a sense of the company culture. Would you be willing to share your experience? 2 responses came quickly, both positive and generic. Great opportunities, professional environment, challenging work. But the third response, from a woman named Jennifer Bradley, who'd left the company 8 months ago, was different. I'd be happy to talk, but not in writing. Can we speak by phone? My hands trembled slightly as I typed my number. Jennifer called within minutes. Hannah? Her voice was cautious, guarded. Yes. Thank you so much for calling. I really appreciate... Before we talk, I need to know something. Did Robert Carlyle recruit you? The question caught me off guard. No. Why do you ask? Jennifer let out a breath. Because if he did, you should run. Run far and run fast. My heart began to race. Can you explain? Not over the phone. And honestly, not to someone I don't know. But I'll tell you this much. The workplace culture investigation 3 years ago? It was about Carlyle. 4 women filed complaints. The company paid them off, made them sign NDAs, and swept the whole thing under the rug. I was one of them. Oh my goodness, I breathed, genuine shock in my voice. Did anything happen to him? Jennifer laughed bitterly. He got promoted. They made him senior partner. That's how Hartwell works. Protect the rainmakers at all costs. I left because I couldn't stomach working there anymore. But I signed the NDA. I can't tell you details. I shouldn't even be telling you this much. I understand. And I'm grateful for your honesty. I paused, then took a risk. Jennifer, what would you say to a woman who just got promoted by Carlyle? The silence on the other end was deafening. When Jennifer finally spoke, her voice was hollow. I'd say, document everything. Every text, every email, every conversation. Keep copies somewhere he can't access. And I'd tell her to find a lawyer who specializes in workplace harassment. Because whatever promises Hartwell made to keep her safe, they're lies. That company will sacrifice anyone to protect Carlyle's reputation. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my kitchen, the laptop screen casting blue light across my face. I'd found my first concrete evidence that Robert Carlyle was a predator, that Hartwell and Associates was complicit in his behavior, and that Tina was likely his latest victim. But I'd also discovered something more troubling. There was a pattern here. A system designed to silence women and reward their abuser. And if Jennifer's NDAs were any indication, fighting back could cost Tina everything. Her career, her reputation, possibly even her marriage if Thomas didn't believe her. I needed more information, but I was running into walls everywhere I turned. Court records sealed, NDAs preventing victims from speaking, a corporation with unlimited resources protecting its own interests. I was a 63-year-old woman with no legal training, no investigative experience, and no authority. What made me think I could take on a company like Hartwell and Associates? My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Stop asking questions about Robert Carlyle. This is your only warning. The blood drained from my face. Someone was watching my online activity. Someone knew what I was doing. I stood and checked every window, making sure they were locked, suddenly aware of how isolated my cottage was. The nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile away. The trees surrounding my property created shadows that could hide anything. Another text arrived. We know where you live, Bernice Winters. We know where your son lives. We know where Oliver goes to school. Stay out of Hartwell business. They'd used my real name, Oliver's name. This wasn't a generic threat. Someone had connected my fake profile to my actual identity, and they'd done it frighteningly fast. My hand shook as I screenshot both messages, saving them to my cloud storage. Then I did something that felt both paranoid and necessary. I called the Millbridge Police Department non-emergency line. "I'd like to report threatening text messages," I told the dispatcher. 30 minutes later, Officer David Preston sat in my living room, a man in his 40s with kind eyes and a skeptical expression. He looked at the messages, took notes, and then delivered the news I'd been dreading. "Mrs. Winters, I understand this is frightening, but legally, these messages don't rise to the level of criminal threats. They're warnings, not explicit threats of violence, and they came from a burner phone, untraceable." "But they mentioned my grandson," I protested. "They mentioned where he goes to school, which is public information," Officer Preston said gently. "I'm sorry, but unless they make an explicit threat or act on these warnings, there's nothing we can do. My advice? Stop whatever investigation you're conducting. These people clearly have resources, and they're telling you to back off. Maybe you should listen." After he left, I sat alone in my cottage, the weight of impossibility settling over me. I was being watched, warned, and threatened. I had no legal recourse, no protection, and no clear path forward. But I also had a grandson who'd trusted me with a devastating secret, and a daughter-in-law who was suffering in silence. The question was, how far was I willing to go to protect them? And what price would I pay if I continued? I looked at my laptop, at Jennifer Bradley's warnings, at the threatening messages on my phone. Then I thought about Oliver's tears and Tina's fear. I opened the laptop again and continued my research. Some battles I'd learned in 63 years of living were worth fighting even when victory seemed impossible. The trick was knowing which ones and how to fight smart rather than hard. I was about to find out if I was as clever as I hoped, or as foolish as I feared. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind against the windows sent my heart racing. The threatening messages had changed everything. What began as a grandmother's concern had escalated into something far more dangerous. By dawn, I'd made a decision. If I was going to help Tina, I needed to do it properly, which meant I needed professional help. At 7 a.m., I called my late husband's brother, Uncle Frank, who'd retired from the FBI 5 years ago and now lived in Vermont. "Bernice, everything all right?" His gravelly voice was thick with sleep. "Frank, I need advice." Off the record, I explained everything. Oliver's revelation, my research, the threatening messages. When I finished, the silence stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "Bernice, listen to me very carefully," Frank finally said. "You're dealing with corporate fixers, people whose job is to protect companies from liability at any cost. These aren't amateurs sending random threats. They've already traced your fake profile, identified you, and warned you off in less than 24 hours. That takes resources and expertise. So I should stop?" I didn't say that. I heard him moving around, the sound of coffee brewing in the background. "I said you need to be smarter. Stop using your real devices. Stop leaving digital footprints. And for heaven's sake, don't conduct this investigation alone. You need allies, preferably ones with legal standing." "Like who? Like Tina herself? Have you considered that maybe she's not just a victim? Maybe she's gathering her own evidence, building her own case. Maybe she needs to know she has support." After we hung up, Frank's words circled in my mind. I'd been so focused on investigating for Tina that I hadn't considered investigating with her. But approaching her directly meant revealing Oliver's confidence, potentially damaging his trust forever. I was still wrestling with this dilemma when my doorbell rang at 9 a.m. Through the peephole, I saw Tina standing on my porch, and my heart nearly stopped. She wore sunglasses despite the overcast morning, and her hands clutched her purse like a lifeline. "Bernice, I'm sorry to come unannounced," she said when I opened the door. Her voice was barely controlled, trembling at the edges. "May I come in?" We sat in my living room, Tina perched on the edge of the sofa, still wearing her sunglasses. I waited, letting the silence build until she was ready to fill it. "Oliver told Thomas last night," she finally said, and my stomach dropped. "Not everything, just that he'd heard his father's boss at our house, that he'd overheard something that scared him. Thomas confronted me this morning before work. "Tina, please let me finish." She removed her sunglasses, and I saw the redness around her eyes, the exhaustion carved into her face. Thomas asked if I was having an affair. That's what he thought. That's what Oliver's words made him think. And I couldn't explain. I couldn't find the words to tell him what's really happening. "So tell me," I said gently. "Tell me everything." The story that poured out was worse than I'd imagined. It had started 8 months ago when Robert Carlyle began mentoring Tina, praising her work, promising advancement. Then came the late-night texts, the unnecessary private meetings, the comments about her appearance. When she tried to maintain professional boundaries, his behavior escalated. He told me that every woman who'd succeeded at Hartwell had understood how to play the game, Tina said, her voice hollow. He said the VP position was mine if I was willing to be flexible. When I refused, he started sabotaging my projects, taking credit for my work, undermining me in meetings. "Why didn't you report him?" Tina laughed bitterly. "To whom? Human Resources? They're paid by Hartwell. The other partners? They've known about Carlyle for years and done nothing. I had no proof, no recordings, nothing but my word against a senior partner with 2 decades of company loyalty. So what changed? Why did you get the promotion?" "Because I found something." Tina reached into her purse and pulled out a USB drive, holding it like it might explode. 3 months ago, I was working late in Carlyle's office, preparing documents for a client meeting. He got called away urgently. His daughter was in a car accident. He left his computer unlocked, and I saw an email thread open on his screen. My hands had gone cold. "What kind of emails?" "Correspondence between Carlyle and Victor Hartwell, the company's founder. They were discussing the culture investigation from 3 years ago. But Bernice, it wasn't just about harassment. They were using company funds to pay off victims, falsifying financial records to hide the settlements, and threatening women who wouldn't sign NDAs with career blacklisting across the entire industry." "Good grief," I breathed. "Tina, that's criminal. It's criminal conspiracy, fraud, witness tampering. I photographed everything with my phone and copied files to this drive. I have evidence of at least 7 women who were paid off, including detailed financial records showing how they laundered the settlement money through fake consulting contracts." "And Carlyle found out you had it?" Tina nodded miserably. "He must have checked his computer logs. 2 days later, he called me into his office. He knew I'd accessed his files. He told me I had 2 choices: accept the VP promotion and keep my mouth shut, or refuse and watch him destroy not just my career, but Thomas's real estate business. He has connections everywhere, Bernice. He could ruin us both with a few phone calls." "So the promotion was a bribe and a leash." Tina's voice cracked. "He promoted me to make it look like everything was fine, like I was complicit in his system. And he's been tightening the leash ever since. The late-night texts, the business dinners. He's making me perform the role of his protégé, his success story. Meanwhile, he's got people watching me, making sure I don't go to authorities. I'm trapped, Bernice. I took his promotion, which makes me look complicit. If I come forward now with this evidence, Hartwell will argue I'm a disgruntled employee trying to extort them after benefiting from their system." I stared at the USB drive on my coffee table like it was a live grenade. "Have you shown this to anyone?" "Just you. I couldn't risk it. Carlyle has private investigators monitoring my communications, my movements. That's probably how they found out you were asking questions. They've been tracking everyone who searches for information about him online." The threatening messages suddenly made perfect sense. "Tina, those people who warned me off, they work for Carlyle?" "For Hartwell, technically. But yes. The company has a whole crisis management team dedicated to protecting partners from liability. They've done this before." She looked at me with desperate eyes. "Bernice, I came here because Oliver trusts you, because Thomas trusts you, and because I need someone who's not tangled in Hartwell's web. I need someone who can help me figure out what to do with this evidence before Carlyle realizes I've already shared it." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. Text message from Thomas. "Mom, need to talk. Coming over in 20 minutes. It's urgent." Tina saw my face change. "What is it?" Thomas is on his way here, right now. The color drained from Tina's face. No, 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 no. If Carlisle's people are watching me, they'll see my car here. They'll know I talked to you. And if Thomas arrives while I'm here, we'll handle it, I said, forcing calm into my voice even as my mind raced. Tina, does Thomas know you're here? I told him I was going shopping. He left for a property showing right after our argument. She stood abruptly, panic sharpening her features. I need to leave, now. Wait. I grabbed the USB drive from the table. Take this with you. Hide it somewhere safe. Not your house, not your office, somewhere Carlisle's people would never look. And Tina? She paused at the door. We're going to fix this. But I need you to trust me. And I need you to buy me time. Can you do that? She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and fled to her car. I watched her drive away, then immediately began preparing for Thomas's arrival. I cleared my laptop from the kitchen table, hid my research notes, and forced my breathing to steady. When Thomas arrived 18 minutes later, his face was a storm of emotions I'd rarely seen. Anger, confusion, betrayal, all churning together. Mom, what's going on? He paced my living room like a caged animal. Oliver finally told me more this morning. He said he heard Carlisle making inappropriate comments to Tina. He said Mom looked scared. And when I confronted Tina about it, she barely denied anything. She just said it was complicated, and that she'd handled it. What does that mean? Did she have an affair? This was the moment. I could tell Thomas everything Tina had shared, hand him the burden of truth, or I could protect the investigation until we had a real plan. Thomas, sit down. I used my mother voice, the one that still commanded obedience even though he was 40 years old. What I'm about to say is going to be difficult to hear, but I need you to listen without interrupting. I told him a carefully edited version, that Tina had been harassed by Carlisle, that she'd gathered evidence of misconduct, that the promotion was coercion rather than recognition of her work. I left out the USB drive, the extent of the criminal conspiracy, and Tina's visit this morning. Thomas's face went through a progression of emotions. Disbelief, rage, anguish. Why didn't she tell me? Why did she let me think? His voice broke. I accused her of having an affair this morning. I looked my wife in the eye and asked if she'd been unfaithful. And all this time she was being... He couldn't finish the sentence. She was protecting you, I said quietly, and protecting her career and trying to figure out how to fight back against people with more power and resources than she has. Thomas, this isn't her fault. None of it. I need to go home. I need to apologize. I need to... No. The sharpness in my voice stopped him. You need to act normal. If Carlisle suspects Tina has shared information, if he thinks she's building a case against him, he'll escalate. These people play for keeps, Thomas. They've already threatened me for asking basic questions. His head snapped up. Threatened you? Mom, what? I showed him the text messages, watched his face pale as he read them. We're going to the police. Right now. The police can't help. These aren't legally actionable threats, and we don't have enough evidence yet to prove criminal conduct. What we need is a lawyer who specializes in corporate misconduct and a strategy to present Tina's evidence in a way that protects her from retaliation. I'll hire the best lawyer in Connecticut and tip off Carlisle's network that we're building a case. Thomas, these people monitor everything. We need to be smarter than they are. We spent the next hour strategizing, and I watched my son transform from hurt husband to protective partner. He understood, finally, the complexity of what Tina faced. But he didn't know about the USB drive, and I intended to keep it that way until I understood exactly what it contained. After Thomas left, I sat in the deepening shadows of my living room, understanding that we'd reached a point of no return. Tina had given me the key to destroying Robert Carlisle and exposing Hartwell and Associates' corruption. But using that key meant putting everyone I loved in the crosshairs of people who'd proven they'd do anything to protect their interests. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. We know Tina Winters visited you today. We know what she gave you. Return the drive within 24 hours or face consequences you can't imagine. My blood turned to ice. They'd been watching. They knew everything. And now the clock was ticking. The 24-hour deadline hung over me like a guillotine blade. I stood at my kitchen window watching the woods around my cottage as darkness fell, wondering how many eyes were watching back. The USB drive was with Tina, presumably hidden somewhere safe, but Carlisle's people believed I had it. That miscalculation might be the only advantage I had left. I called Frank again, this time from a burner phone I'd purchased at the grocery store that afternoon, paying cash like a character in one of my mystery novels. "They're escalating," I told him. "They think I have evidence that could destroy them." "Do you?" "Tina does. But Frank, these people are watching her house, watching mine. How do I move forward when every step is monitored?" "You don't move forward. You move sideways. Create confusion, multiple threads they have to follow. Make them divide their resources." He paused. "Bernice, I'm going to give you a name. Lydia Horton. She's an investigative journalist in Hartford who's been trying to expose corporate misconduct in Connecticut for years. She's protected her sources through some ugly fights. If anyone can help you weaponize that evidence safely, it's her." After we hung up, I researched Lydia Horton on my new burner phone. She'd written exposés on financial fraud, political corruption, and workplace harassment. Her articles were meticulous, well-sourced, and devastating. She was exactly what we needed, if I could reach her without alerting Hartwell's surveillance network. But I couldn't risk contact yet. Not until I understood what was on that USB drive. At 10 p.m., my landline rang. Thomas, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Mom, something's happened. Tina's car was vandalized tonight in the parking garage at her office. All 4 tires slashed, windshield smashed, and someone spray-painted 'Keep Quiet' across the hood." My hands gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. "Was she hurt?" "No, she'd already left. Took an Uber home because she was too shaken to drive after another meeting with Carlisle. Building security just called her. Mom, this isn't random vandalism. This is a message. Have you called the police? They're treating it as simple property crime. No witnesses, no cameras in that section of the garage. Convenient, right?" His voice dripped with bitter sarcasm. "Tina's terrified. She thinks Carlisle ordered this because she's been avoiding his calls today. She's upstairs crying, and Oliver heard everything. He's asking questions I don't know how to answer. Bring them here. Both boys, Tina, all of you. Come now. Mom, if they're watching, let them watch a family gathering at Grandma's house. There's safety in visibility sometimes. And Thomas, on your way, stop at the ATM and withdraw cash, $500. Don't use credit cards for anything until I tell you otherwise." They arrived 40 minutes later. Tina looked like she'd aged a decade in a day, her eyes hollow with fear. Oliver clung to his mother's side while 6-year-old Jessie, oblivious to the tension, immediately found my cookie jar. I settled the boys in the guest room with a movie, then gathered Thomas and Tina in my kitchen. "We need to see what's on that drive," I said quietly. "Tonight, before this gets worse." Tina shook her head violently. "I can't risk accessing it on any personal device. If they're monitoring my network traffic—" "Public library," I interrupted. "Tomorrow morning. They open at 9. We use their computers, which are on a completely different network. We make copies, we document everything, and then we move the original to a safe deposit box at a bank in a different county. They'll follow us," Tina whispered. "Then we make sure they follow the wrong person." I turned to Thomas. "Tomorrow, you're going to drive to 3 different banks in 3 different towns. You'll go inside each one, spend 15 minutes talking to representatives about opening accounts. Make a show of it. While Hartwell's people are tracking you, Tina and I will slip out to the library in Millbridge." Thomas frowned. "How does Tina slip out if they're watching the house?" "Your mother is going to create a diversion," I said, a plan forming even as I spoke. "At 8 a.m. I'm going to drive very obviously to the medical center in Fairfield. I'll park, go inside, spend an hour in the waiting room reading magazines. Anyone watching will assume I have an appointment. That gives Tina time to leave through the woods behind my property. There's a trail that leads to the Hendersons' farm a quarter-mile away. Mrs. Henderson owes me a favor. She'll drive Tina to the library." Tina stared at me. "Bernice, you're talking about counter-surveillance tactics. You're a retired librarian. I'm also a woman who spent 40 years married to a man with federal law enforcement in his family. You pick things up. I met her frightened eyes with steady resolve. Tina, they're trying to scare you into silence. The vandalism, the threats. It's all psychological warfare. But you have something they desperately want to keep hidden, which means you have power. We just need to learn how to use it. That night, Tina and the boys slept in my guest rooms while Thomas returned home. Another piece of the theater we were creating, maintaining appearances of normalcy. I lay awake in my own bed, listening to the house settle, wondering if I was brilliant or foolish for thinking a 63-year-old woman could outmaneuver corporate fixers. Morning came with cold October rain. Perfect weather for what I had planned. Reduced visibility, fewer people out, more chaos to hide in. At 7:30, I made a production of leaving my house, waving to Tina through the window, making sure my movements were visible to anyone watching. I drove to Fairfield Medical Center, parked prominently, and entered the building with my purse and a book, looking like any other senior citizen with a doctor's appointment. Inside, I found the waiting room, signed in at the desk with a fake name for a fake appointment, and settled in to wait. Through the window, I could see the parking lot. Sure enough, a dark sedan had followed me and now idled 3 rows away. The surveillance was almost insultingly obvious. They wanted me to know I was being watched. Meanwhile, if everything was going according to plan, Tina was hiking through the woods to the Henderson farm. An hour later, my burner phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. Tina, using a phone I'd given her last night. At library. Accessing Drive now. I forced myself to sit still, to turn pages of my magazine at regular intervals, to act like someone simply waiting for medical care. The minutes crawled past. 10 minutes. 20. 30. Another text. Bernice, you need to see this. It's worse than I thought. Much worse. My heart hammered, but I maintained my composure. I stood, stretched, walked to the bathroom, came back, checked my watch. 45 minutes had passed since I'd arrived. Time to leave. Staying longer might arouse suspicion. I drove home carefully, checking my mirrors, noting the dark sedan following at a discreet distance. Good. Let them follow me. Let them think they had me contained. At home, I found Tina's car still in my driveway where she'd left it last night. I went inside, made tea, puttered around the kitchen. An hour later, Mrs. Henderson's pickup truck pulled up, and Tina emerged, walking casually to my door like she'd just been borrowing sugar. Once inside, with curtains drawn and voices low, Tina pulled out a sheaf of papers she'd printed at the library. Bernice, Carlisle isn't just harassing women. He's running a systematic operation. She spread documents across my kitchen table. The USB drive contains 7 years of financial records. Hartwell and Associates has been creating shell companies to funnel money from client accounts. Small amounts, hard to notice, but it adds up to millions. Carlisle and Victor Hartwell split the proceeds. The harassment settlements? Those are paid from the embezzled funds, which means they're using stolen money to silence women who threaten to expose the embezzlement. I stared at the documents, understanding dawning. It's a circle. The fraud funds the cover-up, which protects the fraud. Exactly. And look at this. Tina pointed to a spreadsheet showing names and amounts. These are Hartwell clients, major corporations, law firms, even a state pension fund. If this comes out, it's not just Carlisle and Victor Hartwell who go down. It's the entire firm, hundreds of employees, and clients who'll lose millions. The fallout would be catastrophic, which is why they're so desperate to keep it hidden. I studied the papers, my librarian's mind organizing information into patterns. Tina, this is bigger than workplace harassment. This is federal fraud, racketeering. This is prison time for everyone involved. I know. Her voice was barely a whisper. And now I understand why those other women signed NDAs and took the settlements. It wasn't just about harassment. They stumbled onto the fraud. Carlisle gave them a choice. Take money and stay quiet, or fight and get destroyed by the full weight of Hartwell's legal and financial resources while watching innocent employees lose their jobs in the fallout. That's extortion. That's business. Tina's laugh was hollow. Bernice, I've been agonizing over this for months. If I expose this, people will lose their livelihoods. Retirement accounts will vanish. Families will be destroyed. But if I stay silent, Carlisle continues victimizing women and stealing from clients. There's no clean answer. I was about to respond when the landline rang. I answered, and a smooth male voice I didn't recognize spoke. Mrs. Winters, my name is Victor Hartwell. I believe we need to have a conversation. Every muscle in my body tensed. Tina's eyes went wide as she recognized the name. I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage, Mr. Hartwell. I don't know who you are. Of course you do. Just as I know that Tina Winters is currently in your home, and that you've both been very busy this morning at the Millbridge Public Library. His voice remained pleasant, conversational. You're clever, Mrs. Winters. The medical center diversion was well played. But you're out of your depth. What do you want? A meeting. Tonight, 7 p.m. at the Riverside Inn in Fairfield. Bring Tina. Come alone or come with your son. I don't care. But come prepared to discuss a reasonable resolution to this situation. And if we refuse? Then tomorrow morning, the Connecticut State Police will receive an anonymous tip about Tina Winters' embezzlement of client funds from Hartwell and Associates. We have evidence, manufactured but quite convincing, showing that she's been stealing money for the past year. Her new promotion gave her access to accounts, and she's been taking advantage. It would be your word against ours, Mrs. Winters. And we have rather more resources. The line went dead. Tina had heard enough to understand. They're going to frame me for the embezzlement. Make me the scapegoat for everything. Not if we move first. I grabbed my burner phone and pulled up Lydia Horton's contact information. It's time to bring in the journalist. We're out of time for careful plans. But even as I dialed, I wondered, were we taking control of the situation, or walking straight into a trap that Hartwell and Carlisle had been preparing since the moment Tina accessed those files? The meeting at the Riverside Inn was 6 hours away. 6 hours to decide whether to fight or surrender. 6 hours to determine if my family would survive what came next. I had 4 hours before the meeting with Victor Hartwell, and I intended to use every minute. Lydia Horton answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and professional. Ms. Horton, my name is Bernice Winters. I have evidence of corporate fraud and criminal conspiracy at Hartwell and Associates, and I need your help. There was a brief pause. How did you get this number? Frank Frazier gave it to me. He's retired FBI. I know Frank. Her tone shifted from suspicious to interested. What kind of evidence are we talking about? 7 years of financial records showing systematic embezzlement and witness tampering. Multiple victims, millions of dollars. And the people involved have threatened my family to keep us quiet. Can you prove it? I can show you documentation right now if you can get to Millbridge within the hour. Lydia arrived in 43 minutes, driving a weathered Honda and carrying a battered messenger bag. She was younger than I'd expected, mid-40s, with intelligent eyes and the wary posture of someone who'd been burned before. Tina and I had spent the intervening time making additional copies of the documents, storing them in multiple locations. Show me, Lydia said, settling at my kitchen table. For the next 90 minutes, Tina walked her through everything. The harassment, the discovery of the files, the pattern of settlements and fraud. Lydia asked pointed questions, cross-referenced information on her laptop, and took meticulous notes. She was thorough, skeptical, and exactly what we needed. This is explosive, she finally said. If I can verify these financial records, and I have contacts who can, this story brings down one of Connecticut's most prominent firms. But I need more time, a week minimum to properly vet sources and build the story. We don't have a week, I said. We have 3 hours. Victor Hartwell has called a meeting for 7 p.m. tonight, and he's threatening to frame Tina for the embezzlement if we don't comply. Lydia's eyes narrowed. A meeting? That's interesting. Why would he risk face-to-face contact if he holds all the cards? What do you mean? Think about it. If Hartwell really had everything under control, he'd just pull the trigger on framing Tina and be done with it. But instead, he's calling a meeting. That suggests desperation. He wants something from you, probably the original files and your silence. And he's hoping to negotiate before this spirals further out of his control. Tina leaned forward. So what do we do? You go to the meeting, Lydia said, but you go prepared. You wire yourself for audio, you document everything he says, and you make him believe you're willing to negotiate. Meanwhile, I'll have this story ready to publish the moment things go sideways. It's your insurance policy. Wire myself? Tina's voice rose in pitch. I'm not a spy. You don't need to be. A phone in your pocket recording continuously will work. I'll teach you how to position it for clear audio. Lydia pulled equipment from her bag. A small recording device, a backup phone, detailed instructions. Mrs. Winters, you're coming to this meeting too, right? Absolutely. Good. 2 recordings are better than 1. And having you there, a grandmother, a woman with no corporate connections, it changes the dynamic. You're a witness Hartwell can't easily intimidate or discredit. As Lydia prepared our recording setup, Thomas arrived. He'd spent the day creating false trails as planned, visiting banks and making himself visible. Now, learning about the meeting, his face darkened with anger. I'm coming with you. Thomas, no, Tina started. They threatened my family. They vandalized my wife's car. They've been terrorizing my mother. I'm coming, and that's not negotiable. Lydia considered this. Actually, having you there might work in our favor. Hartwell expects frightened women he can manipulate. A protective husband changes the equation. He'll have to be more careful about what he says and does. At 6:15, the 3 of us left for Fairfield in Thomas's car. Oliver and Jessie were safely at Thomas's house with a trusted neighbor, a grandmother from their school who thought we were attending a business dinner. Lydia followed in her own vehicle, parking across the street from the Riverside Inn with equipment to monitor our recording in real time. The inn was an upscale establishment on the Pequannock River, all dark wood and leather furniture. Victor Hartwell had reserved a private dining room on the 2nd floor. We were escorted there by a hostess who seemed oblivious to the tension crackling between us. Hartwell was waiting inside, a man in his late 60s with silver hair and the calm demeanor of someone accustomed to controlling every situation. Robert Carlyle sat beside him, younger and more volatile-looking, his eyes tracking Tina with predatory focus. 2 other people were present, a woman in a severe suit who radiated lawyer, and a younger man with the blank expression of hired security. Mrs. Winters, Tina, Thomas, thank you for coming. Hartwell's voice was warm, grandfatherly even. It made my skin crawl. Please sit. Can we offer you anything? Coffee? Wine? We're fine, I said, keeping my voice steady. Let's discuss why we're here. Hartwell smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Direct. I appreciate that. Very well. Tina, you've taken something that belongs to Hartwell and Associates. I'd like it returned. I don't know what you're talking about, Tina said. Please. We've monitored your access to Robert's computer. We know you copied files. We know you've been sitting on that information for months, trying to decide what to do with it. And we know you accessed those files again this morning at the public library. He leaned forward. Tina, I understand why you might feel aggrieved. Robert's mentorship style can be intense. Sometimes boundaries get blurred. It's regrettable. Regrettable? Thomas's voice was dangerously quiet. He harassed my wife. He coerced her into accepting a promotion she didn't want. He's been terrorizing our family. Carlyle spoke for the first time, his voice dripping with disdain. She had every opportunity to decline the promotion. She chose to accept it, chose to take the salary increase and the benefits. Nobody forced her to do anything. You threatened to destroy my husband's business, Tina said, her voice shaking with controlled fury. You threatened our family's livelihood. I merely explained the realities of our professional network, Carlyle replied smoothly. If you found that threatening, perhaps you're too sensitive for executive leadership. The lawyer intervened. Let's focus on resolution. Mr. Hartwell is prepared to offer very generous terms. Tina, you resign from Hartwell and Associates effective immediately. You'll receive a severance package of $500,000 paid over 2 years. In exchange, you return all copied materials and sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. And if I refuse? Tina asked. Then tomorrow, we file a criminal complaint alleging embezzlement, the lawyer said matter-of-factly. We have evidence showing irregular transfers from client accounts to personal accounts in your name. We have documentation of your computer access to financial systems during suspicious hours. We have testimony from colleagues about your increasingly erratic behavior following your promotion. That's all fabricated, Thomas said. Perhaps, but it will be enough to trigger an investigation. Tina will be arrested, probably at her home in front of her children. She'll spend months fighting charges while her legal fees mount. Her reputation will be destroyed regardless of the outcome. And while she's tied up in court, you, Thomas, will find your real estate license mysteriously delayed for renewal. Your clients will hear rumors about your wife's alleged criminal activity. Your business will collapse. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. I watched Hartwell carefully, noting how he remained silent, letting his subordinates deliver the ugly ultimatums while he maintained his grandfatherly facade. This was a man who'd perfected the art of plausible deniability. "You're very confident," I said quietly. "But you're making a mistake." Hartwell turned his attention to me, amused. "Am I, Mrs. Winters? You're assuming we're isolated and powerless. You're assuming we haven't prepared for this meeting." I pulled out my phone and set it on the table, the recording app clearly visible and running. "Everything you've said tonight has been documented. The threats, the admission of fabricated evidence, all of it." The lawyer's expression flickered. Carlyle tensed, but Hartwell just smiled. "Recording a private conversation without consent is illegal in Connecticut, Mrs. Winters. That recording is inadmissible in court and useless to you. Perhaps, but it's quite useful to journalists. I wonder how your clients would react to hearing you casually discuss framing an employee for embezzlement." I leaned forward. "Mr. Hartwell, you've built an impressive operation over the years. The fraud, the systematic silencing of victims, the network of influence. But you've made everything too complex. Too many moving parts. Too many victims who might decide they're tired of staying quiet. You're bluffing." But Hartwell's voice had lost some of its confidence. "Am I? Did you know that Jennifer Bradley kept copies of everything from 3 years ago? The settlement agreement, the NDA, even recordings of her conversations with Carlyle? She's tired of hiding. So are Ruby Kensington and Monica Pierce and 3 other women whose names you probably don't even remember. They're ready to speak publicly about their experiences at Hartwell." This was partially a bluff. I'd only spoken with Jennifer and she'd been bound by her NDA, but I delivered it with absolute conviction. Tina picked up the thread. "And that's just the harassment. The embezzlement scheme you and Carlyle have been running? The shell companies? The siphoned client funds? I have 7 years of documentation. Every transaction, every fraudulent contract, every penny stolen. That information is currently secured in multiple locations, and if anything happens to me or my family, it automatically goes to law enforcement and media outlets." "You're talking about destroying a firm that employs 300 people, Hartwell said. "Innocent people who have nothing to do with any of this. Their families, their mortgages, their children's college funds. All of it evaporates if you go public. Is that really what you want? To be responsible for that destruction?" It was a masterful manipulation, turning the consequences of his crimes into our moral burden. I saw Tina waver, the weight of potential collateral damage pressing down on her. "That's not on us," I said firmly. "You built this house of cards. You made the choice to steal, to harass, to threaten. You leveraged your employees' livelihoods as human shields for your criminal enterprise. The consequences of exposure are yours to own, not ours. Besides," Thomas added, "there's a solution that protects those innocent employees. Hartwell and Carlyle resign immediately. You cooperate with a financial audit to identify all stolen funds, which get returned to clients. You surrender your law licenses and accept criminal charges without fighting them. And you establish a fund to compensate every woman you've victimized. Do all that, and maybe the firm survives under new leadership." Carlyle shot to his feet. "This is ridiculous. We don't negotiate with—" "Sit down, Robert." Hartwell's voice was steel. Carlyle reluctantly complied, but his face was flushed with rage. Hartwell studied us for a long moment. I could see him calculating angles, weighing options, looking for weakness to exploit. Finally, he spoke. You've thought this through more carefully than I anticipated. I underestimated you, Mrs. Winters. That was my error. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket. But understand this. If you move forward with exposure, I will fight. Not because I'll win. I'm realistic about the evidence you claim to have, but because I can make the process so painful, so expensive, and so public that you'll regret every day of it. Your grandson Oliver, for instance, 12 years old, such a sensitive age. I wonder how he'll handle the media attention when his mother becomes the face of a major scandal. I wonder how his classmates will treat him. Thomas lunged across the table, and I grabbed his arm, holding him back even as my own blood boiled with rage. Are you threatening a child? I asked, my voice deadly calm. I'm explaining consequences. Actions have ripples, Mrs. Winters. You're so focused on your moral righteousness that you haven't considered what this fight will cost your family emotionally and psychologically. Is being right worth destroying their peace, their privacy, their normal lives? It was perhaps the most sophisticated threat yet, couched not as violence, but as concern, designed to make us question our own choices. Tina stood, her voice steady. Mr. Hartwell, my son already knows his mother is being targeted by bad people, teaching him that we fight back against injustice, even when it's hard, even when powerful people threaten us. That's not destroying his childhood. That's showing him what courage looks like, what integrity costs, and what happens when good people refuse to stay silent. You have until midnight, I added. Either you agree to our terms, resignation, restitution, criminal accountability, or the story goes public tomorrow morning. Every document, every recording, every victim's testimony. Your choice. We left the room without waiting for a response. My heart hammered as we descended the stairs, half expecting security to stop us. But no one did. We reached Thomas's car, pulled out of the parking lot, and drove 3 blocks before anyone spoke. Did we just win or sign our death warrant? Thomas asked, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Both, possibly, I admitted. Lydia, did you get everything? Her voice crackled through the phone speaker. Every word. Already uploaded to secure servers. If Hartwell is smart, he'll recognize he's lost and try to minimize damage. If he's arrogant, he'll fight and make everything worse. We drove back to Millbridge in tense silence. At my cottage, Lydia joined us to wait out the midnight deadline. The hours crawled past. 10 p.m., 11, 11:30. At 11:47 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. Mrs. Winters, this is Amanda Pritchard, attorney for Victor Hartwell. My client wishes to discuss preliminary terms of the agreement you proposed. Can we schedule a meeting for tomorrow morning with a mediator present? I looked at Tina, at Thomas, at Lydia, saw in their faces the same cautious hope I felt. 9 a.m., I said. And Ms. Pritchard? We're recording this call too. Just so we're clear. A brief pause. Understood. 9 a.m. tomorrow. After I hung up, none of us spoke for a long moment. Finally, Tina broke down in tears. Not of fear this time, but of relief and exhaustion and the beginning of hope. Is it really over? She whispered. Not over, I corrected gently. But we've turned the corner. The rest is documentation and accountability. What I didn't say was that the hardest part still lay ahead, ensuring Hartwell actually followed through, protecting Tina through the exposure, and helping my family heal from wounds that had cut deeper than any of us had realized. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, we could breathe. The morning sun broke through November clouds as I sat at my kitchen table, watching Tina and Thomas sleep on my couch. They'd been too exhausted and anxious to drive home after midnight, and I'd insisted they stay. Oliver and Jesse were still with the neighbor, safely insulated from the storm that had raged around them. The mediation meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. at a neutral attorney's office in Hartford. Lydia had arrived at 7 with coffee and a grim determination that matched my own. I've been working all night, she said, spreading documents across my table. I contacted Jennifer Bradley, and she's willing to speak on record now. It turns out the statute of limitations on this kind of fraud hasn't run yet, And her NDA is on very shaky ground if a court decides it was used to help conceal criminal activity. 2 other victims have also agreed to come forward. Hartwell's legal shield is disintegrating. Will they be at the mediation? I asked. No, but I've prepared affidavits from all of them. Hartwell needs to see that Tina isn't alone anymore, that he's facing a coordinated group of victims who are done being silent. At 8:30, we drove to Hartford. The law offices of Fraser and Keating occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower overlooking the Connecticut River. The senior partner, Jesse Fraser, no relation to Uncle Frank, had agreed to mediate after Lydia contacted him. He was known for handling complex corporate disputes with fairness and discretion. We were shown to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a table that could seat 20. Victor Hartwell was already there with his attorney Amanda Pritchard and 2 other lawyers I didn't recognize. Notably absent was Robert Carlyle. "Where's Carlyle?" Thomas asked immediately. "Mr. Carlyle has taken a temporary leave of absence from the firm," Pritchard said carefully. "He's not participating in these discussions." "Convenient," Lydia murmured, taking a seat across from them. Morrison entered, a distinguished man in his 60s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Good morning. Let's establish ground rules. This is a mediation, not a negotiation. My role is to facilitate an agreement that addresses the serious allegations raised while minimizing harm to all parties. Everything said here is confidential unless otherwise agreed. Understood?" Everyone nodded. "Mrs. Winters, I understand you're representing your daughter-in-law's interests. Would you like to present your position first?" I'd spent the drive rehearsing what to say, but now, facing Hartwell across polished mahogany, the words came from somewhere deeper than preparation. "Mr. Fraser, for months my daughter-in-law was subjected to harassment, coercion, and threats by Robert Carlyle, a senior partner at Hartwell & Associates. When she discovered evidence of systematic fraud and witness tampering, she was forced into an impossible choice: accept a promotion she didn't want and stay silent, or face career destruction and threats against her family. I pulled out the documentation Tina and I had organized, printouts from the USB drive, transcripts of threatening messages, photographs of her vandalized car, Jennifer Bradley's affidavit. This pattern extends back at least 7 years. Multiple women were victimized, paid off with embezzled client funds, and silenced with NDAs that violated public policy. The fraud alone amounts to millions of dollars. Mr. Hartwell knew about all of it and actively participated in the cover-up. Hartwell's face remained impassive, but I saw his jaw tighten. Morrison examined the documents carefully. After several minutes, he looked up. "These are serious allegations supported by substantial evidence. Mr. Hartwell, how do you respond?" Pritchard answered. "My client acknowledges that Mr. Carlyle's conduct was inappropriate and that Hartwell and Associates failed to adequately supervise him. However, the allegations of fraud are based on incomplete financial records taken without authorization." "The records are complete," Lydia interrupted. "I've started consulting with a forensic accountant, and even from a preliminary look, the shell companies, the falsified consulting contracts, and the systematic siphoning of client funds are already becoming clear. 7 years of quarterly transfers averaging $200,000, split between Carlyle and Hartwell. That's approximately $5 million in theft." The number hung in the air like an anvil. I watched Hartwell's lawyers exchange glances, their confidence visibly cracking. Morrison turned to Hartwell directly. "Sir, I need to hear from you. Are these allegations accurate?" For the first time, Hartwell spoke. His voice had lost its grandfatherly warmth, replaced by something colder and more calculating. "Robert Carlyle acted independently. Any financial irregularities were his doing, not mine." "That's a lie," Tina said quietly. All eyes turned to her. "The USB drive contains emails between you and Carlyle discussing the fraud in detail. You suggested the shell company structure. You approved each transfer. You personally negotiated settlement amounts with victims and instructed Carlyle on how to structure the payments to avoid detection. Emails can be fabricated," Pritchard said quickly. "Not these ones." Lydia pulled out her laptop. "I've had an independent IT specialist verify the metadata. These emails are authentic, sent from Hartwell's personal account at the firm. They include attachments with financial projections, risk assessments, and contingency plans if auditors discovered the scheme. I watched Hartwell's facade finally crack. His shoulders slumped slightly, and he looked suddenly older, diminished. Morrison cleared his throat. Mr. Hartwell, I'm going to be direct. Based on the evidence presented, you're facing potential criminal charges for fraud, embezzlement, witness tampering, and conspiracy. Your firm is facing civil liability that could bankrupt it. Your professional reputation is about to be destroyed. Your only path forward is cooperation and accountability. Do you understand? Hartwell was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, sharply. What are your terms? He asked, looking at me rather than Fraser. I'd prepared for this moment, but actually speaking the words still felt surreal. First, you and Carlyle resign from Hartwell and Associates immediately, effective today. Second, you surrender your law licenses without contest. Third, you provide full cooperation with law enforcement investigations and agree to plead guilty to fraud charges. Fourth, you work with forensic accountants to identify all stolen funds and establish a restitution plan for affected clients. That's 4, Pritchard said. You mentioned preliminary terms yesterday. What else? Tina spoke up. A compensation fund for victims of harassment. Not settlements that come with NDAs. Actual compensation that acknowledges harm without requiring silence. Every woman who was victimized deserves recognition and restitution. And the firm continues operating? Hartwell asked. Under new leadership, with complete transparency about what happened, Thomas said. The innocent employees deserve to keep their jobs, but they also deserve to know the truth about who they were working for. Morrison looked at Hartwell. These terms are reasonable given the circumstances. If you refuse, Mrs. Winters has made it clear that all evidence goes public. You'll face criminal charges anyway, but without any control over the narrative or the outcome. This way, at least some good comes from the wreckage. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Finally, Hartwell spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm prepared to accept the broad outline of your terms, subject to formalizing the details with my counsel and the firm's board. Pritchard looked shocked. Victor, we should discuss. I said I accept. Hartwell met my eyes. Mrs. Winters, you outmaneuvered me. I underestimated your intelligence, your resolve, and your willingness to risk everything for your family. That was my fatal mistake. I've spent 30 years building a reputation and a firm, and I destroyed both through arrogance and greed. I accept the consequences. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement of guilt that would be crucial for what came next. Morrison began drafting the formal agreement, a process that took 3 hours of careful legal language. During breaks, I watched Tina slowly transform. The fear that had shadowed her eyes was being replaced by something else. Not quite peace, but the beginning of it. Relief mixed with exhaustion, mixed with cautious hope. By noon, we had a signed preliminary agreement. Hartwell and Carlyle would step down from their roles. The firm's board would move to appoint an interim management team, and an independent forensic audit would begin within 48 hours, with Hartwell agreeing in principle to cooperate with any future criminal investigation. As we prepared to leave, Hartwell approached Tina directly. I tensed, ready to intervene, but he kept his distance. I won't insult you with an apology, he said. Words can't undo the harm Robert and I caused. But I want you to know that you were right to fight back. You were braver and smarter than we anticipated. And you deserved better from an organization you gave 7 years of excellent work to. Tina studied him for a moment. Mr. Hartwell, I didn't fight back for revenge. I fought back because silence protects predators and punishes victims. I hope the women who come after me at whatever firm emerges from this mess. I hope they never have to make the choices I did. We left the building and stood on the Hartford sidewalk, November wind whipping between the towers. Lydia immediately began making phone calls. Her story would run tomorrow morning, carefully coordinated with law enforcement announcements. Thomas wrapped his arms around Tina, and she finally allowed herself to cry fully, great racking sobs that released months of accumulated tension and fear. "It's over," Thomas kept repeating. "It's really over." But as I watched them, I knew it wasn't quite over. The legal process would take months. The media attention would be intense. The impact on Oliver and Jesse would need careful management. Tina would need therapy to process the trauma. The family would need time to heal from wounds that had cut deeper than any of us had fully realized. Yet, something fundamental had shifted. We'd faced power and corruption and fear, and we'd refused to be silent. We'd been strategic when we needed to be clever, brave when we needed to be bold, and united when they'd tried to divide us. That evening, we gathered at my cottage. Thomas, Tina, Oliver, Jesse, and me. Lydia stopped by briefly to confirm that everything was set for publication. Uncle Frank called from Vermont to congratulate me on running a better investigation than half the agents I supervised. Oliver approached me while the adults were talking, his young face serious. "Grandma, did we win?" I pulled him close. "We did something better than winning, sweetheart. We told the truth, even when it was dangerous. We protected people who were being hurt, and we showed that being right is more important than being comfortable." "Mom says you're a hero." I smiled. "Your mother is the hero. I just helped her remember how strong she already was." Later, after everyone had gone home and the cottage was quiet again, I stood at my kitchen window looking out at the woods. The same woods I'd watched nervously just days ago, wondering who might be lurking in shadows. Tonight they looked peaceful, familiar, mine. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from that dinner celebration where Oliver had whispered his devastating secret, through the investigations and threats and confrontations, to this moment of quiet resolution. I'd discovered capacities in myself I hadn't known existed, for strategic thinking, for courage under pressure, for protecting my family against forces that had seemed insurmountable. At 63, I'd spent years feeling invisible, as though age had diminished my relevance. But this experience had taught me something crucial. Wisdom doesn't diminish with age. It accumulates. Experience isn't a liability. It's an asset. And the combination of patience, intelligence, and lived knowledge can be more powerful than youth, aggression, or brute force. My phone buzzed with a text from Tina. "Thank you for believing me. Thank you for fighting with me. Thank you for showing me that I didn't have to face this alone. I love you." I typed back, "You were never alone. That's what family means. I love you too." The cottage settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Media interviews, legal proceedings, difficult conversations with Oliver about what had happened and why. But tonight, I allowed myself to simply be grateful. Grateful for my grandson's courage in speaking up. Grateful for Tina's resilience in the face of systematic abuse. Grateful for Thomas's support once he understood the truth. Grateful for Lydia's professionalism and Jennifer Bradley's willingness to finally break her silence. Grateful even for Uncle Frank's practical wisdom and Officer Preston's honest limitations. And yes, grateful for whatever stubborn determination had kept me digging when it would have been easier to look away, safer to stay silent, simpler to believe that someone else would solve the problem. The mystery I'd uncovered hadn't been the kind I read about in novels, no murdered bodies or stolen jewels, but it had been just as dangerous, just as complex, and ultimately just as important. Corporate corruption, systematic harassment, the silencing of victims, these were mysteries that destroyed lives quietly, without dramatic crime scenes or obvious villains, until someone refused to accept the silence, until someone decided that truth mattered more than comfort, justice more than convenience, and family more than fear. I made myself a cup of tea and settled into my favorite chair with one of my mystery novels. But I found myself smiling at the fictional detective's methods, thinking about how real investigation was messier, scarier, and ultimately more satisfying than fiction could ever capture. The weight of silence, I'd discovered, was heavier than the risk of speaking up, and the strength to break that silence could come from the most unexpected places. Even from a grandmother in a cottage in Connecticut who simply refused to let her family be destroyed by other people's secrets. Outside, an early winter snow began to fall, covering the world in quiet white. Inside, I was warm, safe, and at peace. The investigation was over. The healing could begin. And tomorrow, when Tina's story went public and the world learned what had happened at Hartwell and Associates, other women who'd been silenced would see that speaking up was possible, that fighting back could work, that they didn't have to carry their burdens alone. That was the real victory, not just saving one family, but maybe, just maybe, inspiring others to find their own courage. I sipped my tea and watched the snow fall, grateful for mystery novels, for stubborn determination, for family who trusted me, and for the kind of quiet strength that only comes with age and experience. At 63, I'd helped take down a corrupt organization and protect the people I loved most. Not bad for a grandmother from Millbridge. Not bad at all. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out the video on your screen right now. I'm sure it will surprise you.